Last King of Scotland, just got some BAFTA nominations, including Best Actor for Forest Whitaker and Best Supporting Actor for your man James McAvoy, whose career, as we have just discovered, is entirely
down to David Hayman.
Exactly. The story of Idi Amin, military leader who famously took over Uganda after a military coup in, was it 1971? Early 1970s.
You're the critic.
Okay, fine. Yeah, the critic as opposed to the historian. A hideous regime, and yet, as people who are old enough to remember the news reports from the time, he matched this absolutely horrible regime with this sense of kind of insane humour. There was a famous series of, was it Alan Corrin, the Idi Amin bulletins, and he used to sort of do this pastiche of, Idi Amin's bulletins himself. I mean, this mad character who granted himself all kinds of awards, called the Last King of Scotland because he claimed heritage as the Last King of Scotland, was often seen, with a bagpipe and
it was 71.
It was 1971. And what we have here is a recreation of the story of Idi Amin, as told by Kevin Macdonald, who, of course, is a documentary filmmaker who made that film Touching the Void, which is an extraordinary piece of work, which I think it won Best British Film a few years ago. Extraordinary piece of work. And an absolutely standout performance by Forest Whitaker, who, for my money, brilliantly manages to capture both the humour and the horror of that extraordinary character. It is an extraordinary, charismatic performance. I mean, it's a very, very difficult role to pull off because, on the one hand, you really do need to convey the horror of that character. And I think, you've seen the film, right? Mm-hmm. It is true that when it has to turn nasty, it turns really nasty. You do leave at the end of it thinking that you have been witness to some, genuinely appalling stuff. You agree?
There are certainly some scenes in the last 15, 20 minutes which I'll be happy if I don't see again.
But it's exactly right that that's how it should be.
Well, you can't, it says, makes it quite clear, I think on the credits at the end, talking about the credits, he was responsible for 300,000 deaths of his own people. So
exactly.
There's no way you can do a film about that without showing the brutality.
And it would trivialise it to do otherwise. I think what's extraordinary about the film, it's not flawless, but it is pretty impressive. James McAvoy has, in some ways, a more difficult job because he's the character through whose eyes we effectively come to see Idi Amin. He goes over, he's just passed his medical exams, he goes over what he thinks would be a little, time out. He ends up being personal physician to Idi Amin. It's through him that we see the character and the madness and the insanity and the craziness of what's going on. Now, I know that some people have a problem with seeing, characters mediated, obviously, through a character that's designed to please a Western audience, but I think in order to do this properly, you really have to give the audience something. Otherwise, it's almost unbelievable. Forest Whitaker's performance is terrific, but it would almost be impossible to get beyond the sort of the shock of that character if you didn't have James McAvoy doing it. And James McAvoy actually has quite a difficult job because obviously his character is a composite character. It's not, it's not factually accurate in the way that other parts of the movie are, but it's leading you into the story. It's making you believe in it emotionally. One assumes that there will be people going to see The Last King of Scotland who aren't aware of the events of that time. Obviously, we are of an age now when we remember it, but there'll be a young audience for this film as well. I think the most impressive thing about it is that when it needs to be sort of exciting as an action drama, as a piece of storytelling, it is that. But it never loses sight of its sort of greater political goal, which is that it is telling a truly appalling story. And I think anything that can popularise those politics in this way is to be applauded. The most astonishing thing for me, however, was Forest Whitaker's performance, because I remember thinking when he was cast. You remember when Anthony Hopkins played Nixon, and there's very little physical similarity between Anthony Hopkins and Nixon, but he got the gestures right, he got the movements right, he carried his shoulders right. It was almost like he reconfigured his face in a way that made you feel that was the presence. Forest Whitaker doesn't actually look like Idi Amin, but that clip, in fact, which we just heard, which is right about the first time that we see him, he jumps on the stage and you go, "Look, it's Forest Whitaker dressed as General Idi Amin." But then after that, you think, "Oh, no." But that's exactly right. Actually, you've hit the nail on the head, which is unusual for you.
Thanks. I've been practicing.
It's entirely down to his performance rather than his physical appearance that does it. It's strange in a way because the poster is that big, very close-up picture of Forest Whitaker's face. and yet you have to see it. You have to see the performance moving. You have to see the physicality of it. You have to see the way in which he moves and behaves and inhabits the screen in order to understand just how powerful it is. I think that everything about it, when it turns grim, it's able to turn grim in a way which is so horrendous and so horrible that, I mean, up until that point, there have been moments almost of slapstick comedy. There's one insane moment in which he claims to be terribly ill, and the whole scene, you know, ends up in the breaking of wind, and it's clearly a humorous moment, but it's very, very dark humour. It's humour within the context of this terrible series of catastrophes unfolding before you. I thought it was a very admirable piece of work. It's, as I said, it's not flawless. There are times when you think, I can feel the plot contrivances working too hard. There are times in which James McAvoy has to hold together a role which is very complicated. It's written by Peter Morgan, who, you know, of course, the Queen and the Deal, is, you know, well versed in taking material that is based on truth and slightly fictionalising it. Factional, I think, is the way that we.
Well, because this character didn't exist.
No, exactly. But we are told that character is a kind of composite of other people. No, absolutely, he is a fictional character, but it's through his eyes that we see things. So generally, a thumbs up, but certainly not for the faint-hearted. But very, very good for popularising a very, very difficult time and, you know, making it acceptable. I mean, I think if you knew nothing about that character at all, you would be riveted by the drama. You agree?
Yes, and I was also thinking when he puts in this to English ears is a great vocal performance.
Yes.
I mean, there was a moment when I thought he did put in, Forest Whitaker did do one of the worst English accents ever, of course, in The Crying Game.
Yeah, terrible.
Where he wanders between Australia, South Africa, Cockney and everything else thrown in. So it'd be interesting to hear from a Ugandan as to whether he's got
that accent right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But to my it sounded fine.
But it's funny, I mean, Forest Whitaker, when he's good, he's very, very good. And when he's bad, he's The Crying Game. And he is terrible in The Crying Game.
Oscar, do you think?
It's possible. A nomination is possible. I think he's leading the pack as far as the BAFTA nominations is concerned. I mean, I think he is a strong contender there, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if he won.